Hello everyone, it is that time. As usual, not exactly 2 o'clock, but closer. I'm showing some improvement in that regard. So, I grabbed a camera to stick here on the tank for y'all. That maybe will look okay. Maybe not. We'll find out. Let's see what that looks like. Hi Rick, how are you? Mateus, how are you doing? Hey Pickle Boy. Hi Debbie, do we have decent audio today? I'm hoping we do. I see we're getting a little reflection from the backyard on the glass. Let's see if I can do this slightly to fix that. There we go. And maybe tilt it down a little bit more. It's about as good as we're going to get for a webcam. Thank you guys. Appreciate getting information about audiovisuals. That's great. So welcome to this week's live stream. To get some business out of the way, we want to definitely, if you like these videos, please hit the thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber to this channel, you should be. I released a really good video roughly 2 weeks ago that was all about my new sump and got a ton of views. I mean, you guys really liked that video. And I've got some really cool videos coming up. And with those coming out, I'd hate for you to miss it because you're not a subscriber, so be sure that you do. Next Saturday, there won't be a live stream because I'll be at Comic-Con in San Diego. I'm going to go there. I leave on Wednesday and I'll be gone until Monday. And because of that, I thought, what a great time to talk about what to do with your tank when you're traveling, because so many of us do take trips different times of the year and have to basically leave it behind and hope for the best. So if you are not, if you've heard this before, maybe there'll be some tip that'll help you that you forgot, or maybe some great idea that will come into play. If you haven't heard it before, then I hope you enjoy this topic because it's an important one, and it's always timely, because there's always going to be something going on in your life, whether you had to stay longer at work, whether you had a family emergency, you took a vacation, you won the lottery. Whatever it takes you away from your home, we want to make sure that your aquarium is going to be safe, and we want to avoid some of the common pitfalls that occur. For example, and this is a true story, someone recently posted that because they went on vacation for a week, the husband turned off the AC unit in the house and got the tank up to 100 degrees. And I think the tank belonged to the wife more than the husband. So she was really upset because everything died. And it's because he changed the climate controls, probably thinking he was saving money, which if you know anything about reef keeping, if you kill everything in your tank, it's way more expensive to fix it. So didn't save any money there. And it was a big mistake. And we want to make sure, so first of all, don't change the climate control on your house unless your tank can handle it. If you have reliance on heaters and chillers and it absolutely does not matter what's going on in the room, then I guess, yeah, you could bump it up. But keep in mind that if the house gets too crazy hot, your chiller may not be able to keep up. So it's really important that you lock in those temperatures in the room that the aquarium is in as best you can. Be reasonable. Maybe your house can handle 2 degrees warmer than you're usually comfortable with, and your tank won't be affected. But the best way to know that is to test this out for a couple of days and observe the tank and watch the readings. Whether you have a digital controller that will track it, or you just constantly go over and look at the glass thermometer day and night, 15, 24 times, something like that, to really get a good feel for what does your tank do at night? What does it do during the daytime? What's the worst part of the day? What about when it's the lowest temperature? Is it getting too cold? We want to make sure everything's fine. Okay, so temperature. Evaporation is another big one. And I always tell everyone the first thing you should do when you're setting up a tank is set up an auto top-off system. And that's because it makes your life so much easier. And if you have water being replenished automatically so you don't have to think about it, that's just awesome. And it's not hard to do, and it doesn't cost a lot either. You can basically, you can buy a kit that you can hook up to your system. That's probably going to be around $125 or so, or you can DIY something for far less with a container of water that's next to your sump or next to your tank, and it replaces the water as it evaporates. Way back in the old days when I had my 29-gallon aquarium, before I had a top-off system, I would just add water when I was in the mood. And maybe some of you do that. Like you are looking at your tank and you're like, oh, it's evaporated a little bit of water. I'll do it later. And then later becomes 3 days later, and now it's this far down. You're like, yeah, I better add some water to the tank because my filter is making a funny noise. Well, what's happened in a small aquarium with evaporation is that the salinity of the tank is going to rise higher and higher as the water evaporates out because the salt stays. Hearing weird sounds, so I had to look around for a second. If you're trying to overcome that bad tendency, one of the best ways to stay on top of topping off manually is whenever you feed the tank, add some water to the tank at the same time. And that way it's just done at the same time and your water level never changes and there's nothing to feel guilty about later or to worry about. So I would suggest that. But an automatic top-off system is best. And when you're at home, you probably refill it every 3 or 4 days or something like that. And that will take care of your aquarium. But if you're gone for like a 1 week or 2 week trip, now we have something else to be concerned about. Now we are thinking, well, I only have 4 days worth of water in that container. I'm going to be gone for 14 days. What do I do for 10 more days? So the first thing you can do is you can add extra water to your system. So for example, if your aquarium has enough room in the sump, even with the power out, to add more water, add some more salt water. It'll lower your salinity a little bit initially, but then you get like 2 extra days before evaporation starts happening on your tank visibly. You know, because you've topped off an extra amount of water to get you by for 2 more days. So now you're up to 6 days worth of top off water versus your normal 4 days, for example. I don't recommend running an RODI system directly to your tank because if anything goes wrong, it's going to keep adding that much water every hour until you notice or until there's a flood or until you return home and then you find how bad the flood was. So I highly discourage that. I'd much rather see you have some kind of a barrel or trash can or large Rubbermaid bin near your aquarium during your trip that holds all the top-off water. And then the other thing about top-off, it's really important when you set one up that you set it up correctly. And that means that, you know, there's going to be a vessel of water, there's an aquarium with a sensor, there's going to be a small pump, there's going to be some tubing. And all of that has to work in conjunction with itself, that when it turns on, it adds some water, but when it turns off, it doesn't keep adding water or it doesn't suck water out of your tank. So one of the ways to overcome that would be, for example, if you had a barrel of water right here in this spot and you had a pump down inside it and you pumped tubing all the way up into the display tank and somehow secured that tubing to the tank, you know, some kind of temporary rig that will keep it there absolutely safely for the entire time you're gone. And the reason you want it to be really safely affixed is because if it falls off the tank, it'll top off next to your tank and your tank doesn't benefit and your floor gets wet. So we want to make sure that it's really well attached to the tank and that the tubing going over and into the tank does not go under the water, because if it was under the water and it's adding water, then when the pump turns off, it'll start siphoning water back out and pull water out of the aquarium, which you don't want to happen either. So figure out a way to where you can rig a top-off tube that's higher than the water level of the barrel, and that will definitely break the siphon when it turns off. And if you do all of that, you can be gone for a longer amount of time without worry about top-off water. So I definitely want to recommend that you get that set up soon, and that way it's already in place, you're used to it, and you're familiar with it. So when you do go on a trip, it's not like you did it at the last minute. And that leads me to my next point. Whenever you go on a trip, you definitely do not want to change anything big on your tank. And that is such a, it's more than a cliche. And a lot of people do it. They're like, oh, my tank really could use such and such before I go. And so you make this big major change, whatever it is. And of course, everything goes to crap because you left the next day. So it's much better to just, if your tank is doing fine on idle, let it continue to idle. When you come home from your trip, do that big thing you're going to do. Like, let's say you want to install a biopellet reactor, or let's say you decided you wanted to start dosing something new, like Nopox, and you've never used it before. It's the worst time ever to hook something up like that to your tank when you're away. because no one besides you knows your tank the best. And so if someone else walks in, they might not understand what you're doing, or they might think you know what you're doing. And they think, oh, well, I guess that's what they wanted. And then everything goes to crap. And we don't want that to happen. So don't make any major changes on your tank before you leave town. I told you guys I'm leaving on Wednesday. So I'm spending today and tomorrow working on my tank with minor things. I'm not going to do anything crazy because, again, I don't want to make a change. And for example, someone said, when are you going to hook up the Clarisy? I said, I'll hook it up when I come back because I want to be here when it's on. I want to be here to observe it. I don't want to try something out while I'm out of town. That's just the worst way to handle it. If you feel that your tank needs a water change, you can do a water change, or you can just do it when you get back. It's one of those things where you just have to decide what are you most comfortable with. But if you think your tank can go another 7 or 14 days without a water change, I would hold off. And that way you're home. And again, this is me telling you, don't do everything today if you're leaving tomorrow. If you're leaving in 4 or 5 days, then yeah, you can do what you want to do today. And then you can observe for 4 days before you leave town and say, yeah, everything's great. But if you do anything major, like, oh, I want to remove half my sand bed, or I'm going to switch out to a new light fixture that I've never used before because it's really awesome, but you don't know how it works, this darn light could stay on 24 hours a day while you're gone for 14 days and just cook your livestock. I'm not talking about the heat, but it would just bleach all your corals. A lot of them would probably die because it's too much light, too long, every day. These are the things we want to avoid. We want everything to be as automated as possible. And if your tank's already running on autopilot pretty well now, you just want to continue to do that. So don't switch out a light fixture, for example. Now, ways to keep up with your aquarium while you're traveling would be to have a controller of some kind. Now, the Apex is what I use. GHL exists. There are new testing devices that let you read the parameters on your phone, like the ReefBot is out, the Trident is out, which is part of Apex. Mindstream is hitting the market. So you have some ways to like log in on your phone and just check the tank temperature, or check the temperature, well, nowadays we can check alkalinity of calcium and magnesium, which is amazing. You could check on your nitrate levels or your phosphate, whatever you've got rigged. But having that ability to check on it when you're out of town is a really nice feature. And another feature that might be handy or convenient is if you had some webcams in your home pointed at the tank where you can just kind of log in. We know it's not going to be great video quality, but you can just see if the fish are swimming right side up. And you can kind of say, yeah, the flow is still on. It's okay. You might be in an area of the world where you just have no reception, and you'll just have to hope for the best. Because, if you're on vacation, you should be enjoying your vacation. And if you're on vacation stressing about your aquarium, you're really not enjoying your vacation. So historically, I would just go on my trips. When I walk out the door, that's it. My hands are off of it. I hope for the best. And I do have a tank sitter. So I want to go into that next. When you are considering having a helper with your aquarium, you kind of need to train them or make sure they really know their stuff. And this works for spouses, other family members, a neighbor, or another local hobbyist, which is my personal preference. I love a hobbyist that really knows their tank to help me with my tank because I can trust them far more than just someone random. So I've done the thing where I've asked someone convenient, could you just check on it? And it was like a nightmare. So you want to make sure they're really good. And you can be picky because it's your tank. Don't feel like, well, I have to use this person. If you're not happy, find the next one. There's 7 billion people on this planet. Surely you can find someone else that can help. And if you can't find one, then you're going to have to train a minion, basically. You're going to have to teach them exactly how it all ticks. And you want to train them especially to contact you if there's a problem. You want them to send you a text or an email and or FaceTime or Google Hangouts or however you communicate, and just say, this is a really weird noise. Is that okay? And that way you can say, yeah, it does that. The pump's going out. I hope it'll last. One of those things. Or, like I had a trip last year to Mac, and I was gone for 6 days or so, and I cleaned my Vortec pumps, like I do every couple of months, and I put them back on the tank, and I did it the night before my trip, and then I got on my plane and flew away, and I forgot to turn those pumps back on. My tank sitter saw they were off and never told me a word. And when I got home, the first thing I noticed was the flow was off. I was like, oh my God, this has been off for 6 days. I'm an idiot. And I wrote him and said, did you notice these were off? And he says, yeah, I figured you had a perfectly good reason. I was like, no, I did not have a good reason. I'm an idiot. And I really want you to tell me in the future, hey, this is turned off. Is that okay? Or would you like me to turn it back on? That would be awesome. Now, there are other things you can do, especially like, for example, and I'm going to talk about Apex because I've been using that brand of controller since 2004, so it's all I think about. But with the newer Apex, you're able to actually measure the power monitoring of each outlet that something's plugged into. So you can actually look at the power consumption and say, wow, it says 0 watts on this one and 0 watts on this one, but this one's got 80 watts and this one's got 240 watts. Those two things are off. Why are they off? And you can even set it up with an alert or an alarm to send you a text or notification of some kind, a push notification, to say such and such is operating at a lower threshold, than what you've chosen for the wattage. So for example, let's say your pump normally pulls 100 watts, and now it's only pulling 8. It would send you a notification because it's below, let's say you picked an arbitrary number of like 85 watts. And that way you knew anytime it's under that, there's something not right with the pump. It's frozen, it's fallen apart, it's failed, it's off. So that plug monitoring is kind of a handy thing that I've only begun to start using recently. When it comes to tank sitters, the question is, what are they doing? What do you want them to do? Do you want them to clean the glass? Because a lot of people say, I don't want anyone touching my glass because they'll scratch it. And that's a very normal feeling, and you can say, please do not clean the glass. Do you want them to feed the tank? And if so, how much food? And this is where you need to be very specific. I don't just put out food on the counter and say, here's the food I use, because invariably they will just go to town and use a whole bunch of food that you would never have used yourself. And if you normally are using frozen foods, what you can do is you can prepare individual days worth of food in little tiny deli containers that each are marked with a day of the week. And you can just put Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever. Or you can just put one for each day, and hopefully they can remember, I just put some in, I won't need another one until tomorrow. But if you can prepare the food in advance, let's say you only want to use half a cube of food, not a whole cube, you can cut it in half and put one in each container and put those in the freezer, and then your tank sitter will know, that's for today, I'll go melt it and I'm going to pour it in the tank and feed his fish. And that's the end of it. The tank sitter will of course check the temperature of the home and let you know the tank's okay. They can let you know if there's any weird sounds. They can see if the tank isn't getting enough water, if you've trained them. That's the problem. People that don't know aquariums are kind of blind and don't really see all those nuances that we can see from 20 feet away. We just feel it in our bones, and they're like, well, I thought it was fine. So we want to make sure that we're finding, we're giving them enough knowledge so that we can trust them as much as possible. So if you can do that, you'll, and this is going to be kind of a thing that hopefully you use the same person over and over and over, and they get better and better and better because they become more and more familiar with your tank. A tank sitter should swing by and stick around for a few minutes. It shouldn't be a quick 2-minute trip. You shouldn't just like bust in the door, throw in the food, look around, run out the door. I mean, if that's the case, odds are they're going to miss something that's going on, like protein skimmer overflowing like crazy. So you want to, encourage them, come on over, if there's food in the fridge, grab yourself a drink, relax, enjoy the tank, make sure you feed them, let me know if you see something odd. Anything seems weird, contact me, and just say, I'll reply to you as quick as I can. And so unfortunately, I've had times where my tank sitter said, this and this is happening, and by the time I received the text, he would say, it's too late, I already left. I'm not there anymore. And, so there is a slight, time lag that you have to contend with that could happen. And, if it's not major, you can just move on with your life. If it is a big deal, then you have to decide how much you're going to push the issue. For example, if your tank, your controller says the power's out and it's 2 in the morning, do you contact the tank sitter at 2 a.m. and say, hey, the power's out of my house, I need you to run over there and take care of that? Or do you just think, I'm going to let this one ride because probably in 15 to 30 minutes power is going to be restored and it's going to be okay? And that's a hard one. That's a real hard one. And that's an absolute true story that happened to me at Mackinac. It was a Friday or Saturday night, and at 2 a.m., ding, your tank is off. And I was like, oh. And I was thinking, man, do I want to call my tank sitter? Because then I was thinking, what is he going to do? Is he going to pull out the generator and run the extension cords? And, you know, he's going to babysit the house while, you know, waiting for power to come back whenever it comes back. And I was just like, I'm on a trip. I'm hoping for the best. Yeah, I'm not going to do that to my tank sitter. But then, of course, you know, a couple hours later, I set a timer on my phone to wake me up again so I could check and see if I had a report. And it did. So I knew power was restored again. So I was like, all right. But there you go. That's some of the things that I wanted to cover with you. One thing you can do for feeding if you don't trust your tank sitter is you can buy an automatic feeder. And Eheim is the one I've been using for many years. And they're not perfect, and they do drive me crazy from time to time. But this is a this is one that was on my tank until recently. And it uses AA batteries. And there's a clock in the top here where you would set the time when you want to run. And then when you push the button, it'll spin the drum one time to prove it works. And then you can observe it dropping food into your tank. And having something like this on your tank is great. You just want to make sure it's in a nice, safe, secure spot where it can't fall into the tank because, of course, batteries and electronics are bad for salt water. But this is one way to guarantee that your aquarium is getting some food automatically. And that one lets you feed multiple times a day. You can set the slit where the food comes out very, very narrow. So only a pinch comes out. And you can have it do it 2 minutes in a row, like 1 minute, one rotation, then it waits a minute, and then it does it again. And then in 6 hours, you could do it again and again. And there's a multitude of settings you could use. So you could have it feed a tiny bit 16 times a day if you're crazy. I don't think it's quite that high, but there's a lot of rotations that are possible in the programming. There's 4 set points, and each one can be double. So that's 8 times that you could actually feed. And, you know, on my tanks, I like to have each one drop in once. And this one here, I had just filled it up a couple weeks ago, so it'd be good for a while. And then I went to lunch when I came back. I mentioned this last week. When I came back, the thing was still spinning. It was completely empty. A whole month's worth of food went in the tank. Very annoying. So I need to investigate what's going on with this thing because I'm about to leave town, and I want to make sure that my tank has some automatic food happening in case the tank sitter can't come by, because things come up for them as well. Also, you want to make sure all of your containers are filled up properly. If you are a person that uses 2 or 3 part dosing or more, you want to make sure all your vessels have enough fluid while you're out of town. Because if you have a container that's really low in alkalinity and you're traveling for 14 days, there's a good chance you're not going to have enough, and your tank's alkalinity is going to plummet until you get home, and you'll be dealing with a kind of a triage situation trying to fix things. So make sure all of your containers have filled up with calcium, alkalinity, magnesium. If you're dosing no-pox or vodka, you want to make sure they're the right amounts. You want to make sure your tubing that puts the fluid into your sump are not clogged. So you want to push the test button on each one and observe that it's actually coming out. If you haven't calibrated in a while, it'd be good to calibrate to make sure it's still dosing the amount you want dosed to the tank. If you have a calcium reactor, you want to make sure there's enough media in it and that you have enough CO2 in the tank. You know, these are, I know it sounds like normal stuff, but it's a little more effort when you're going to leave town for a while and it's on autopilot. And you want to make it as simple as possible so that whoever is helping with your tank, you can say, what does this say on the side? Where's the water line on this? Send me a picture. That's a great one. Send me a picture of what you're talking about, or a short video clip if you're able to receive video. And that way you can kind of get a visual of what's going on, and you can say, yeah, that's nothing, don't worry about it. If you're a filter sock person and you're gone 14 days, there's no benefit having a sock on there, and it might just be best to just remove them entirely. All right. I think that's everything I've got here. I haven't looked at any of your questions yet. I wanted to stick to the topic for as long as I possibly could. Johnny asks me, how do you like the Clarisy? I haven't used it yet. I've put it together. I've got the sump prepared for it, but I haven't installed it yet. I've been using my sock box because that's been pretty awesome. But when I come back from Comic-Con, that's when I'm going to hook up the Clarisy and actually operate it and see how she does. But I'm hoping for some really good results, because then I can finish my product review. Eric asked me, have you ever tried the frozen food making kit Smarter Reefs is doing for when you go on vacation? I'm not sure about the brand name, but there is something on the market that kind of makes like fish food popsicles that you can then set on the edge of your tank, or your tank sitter could, and it's kind of like a weird cup funnel situation, and then the food is hanging off this popsicle stick, and it slowly melts and drips and falls into the tank. It's kind of a cool idea, but some of the food vendors are not really big fans of it because they don't like their food being thawed to refreeze it as a new shape. And so there's a kind of a downside there. I mean, there's a potential that the food may not still have the same quality because it's been thawed out and then refrozen. So no, I haven't used that type. I think it's interesting, and I thought it was kind of a neat idea until I was listening to different frozen food fish vendors talk about how they didn't want their food melted. It's like, okay. Yeah. So there's two sides to every story. What other controllers are out there besides the Apex? Right now, GHL is a big contender. Reefkeeper still exists, but has zero support and zero updates. I don't even know if you can even log in with any kind, because their website's gone too. E-Loop from Current USA is a type of controller that has a lot of components that all communicate to each other, but I'm not sure how that works. They reached out to me at one point and said, they'd like me to take a look at it, but it just never happened. So I don't have any experience with that one. And Mobius, I believe, is a new one that Ecotech is coming out with probably this September at MACNA. And I was reading about that one on Reef Builders, and some kind of a controller that makes sense because they've had a lot of their equipment talk to a Reef Link, which you can control with an app on your phone. And it seems logical that it would take us to the point where there's an actual physical controller for the tank. So that's another one on the market. And I'm sure there's a few others I'm not thinking of. But I would say, just based on everything I see, Apex is the big choice, is the most preferred choice these days. Jason says, where can we see you next this year? MACNA, I'll be there. Aquashella in Chicago, I'll be there. And I've got this other trip that's in the back of my brain that I keep forgetting where it is. And we've been trying to book the flight, but I haven't booked it yet. And I feel like that one's up north, but I can't remember the facts. It's in October, like on the 12th of October. If that helps, I might be there. William says, how do I get you to build me a sump? I tried to email you with no reply. That is possible. There is a lot of you guys, and there's one of me. If you don't hear from me, resend that email. I try that if I can't answer an email when I come across it, I'll mark it unread, and that way I will go back and find it. But I have like 6,000 unread emails. So and it's not an exaggeration, it's a real number. So I do apologize if you feel ignored. Don't be, you're not ignored. There's one of me. So hit me up again, and I will get back with you as best I can. And I recently had an injury on my hand, and it kind of slowed me down, and I have been getting back to work. Just as of the last few days, I probably got about 15 orders shipped out this week, which is pretty decent considering my hand was down. But yeah, so hit me up again. And I guess I should put this on the screen since we're talking about this. I do appreciate any business that you give me at milesreef.com because it literally pays my bills. And so anytime you buy anything, you're feeding Spock and you're feeding me. So I do appreciate it. And so a lot of the aquarium supplies that I talk about on this channel, because I use them and believe in them, and so I figured why not sell them. And the benefit is that if I sell something that I have already used, I usually have some feedback I can give you, or some advice or some recommendations of how to use it to make your experience more easy to accomplish. So I would just say that's why you see the things you see me talking about. It's not that I'm getting them for free or something like that. I like them. And then I say to the vendor, can I sell this on my website? And if they say yes, then I carry it. And if they say no, I'm like, okay, I understand. So that's why I don't sell everything. But I do sell a lot of things. There's probably 160 items on the website, including probably about 30 things that I build out of acrylic. So I've been an acrylic fabricator now for over 15 years. And I have been selling all kinds of acrylic products around the world. And that's one of the reasons I'm going to Comic-Con. I'm going to see if I can sell some trophy cases to put around the statuettes, the the manquettes that people love to buy. You know, they'll buy this really awesome, well-designed thing that costs $200, $600, $1,200, and they want to protect it and keep it clean. So I make an acrylic box that fits right on top. And then you can put a light on the top, and it's really pretty, and it stays immaculate, and so I'm hoping to sell some of those. Reef Dude says, you need to figure out how to clone yourself. You know, Devin, that's not a good idea because I have such trust issues, I wouldn't trust myself. Have you ever, Dustin says, have you ever built or would you consider building a custom tank for someone, like a 135 to 200 gallon tank? I haven't done anything bigger than I think it was a 90. I don't mind making frag tanks, but display tanks, I haven't done it. My frag system, that tank I built, and a lot of people don't know that. They're like, oh my God, you made that? And I'm like, yeah, and it's a 60 gallon. It's not really big. But when you're talking about bigger tanks, you're talking about thicker acrylic, and the tanks, when they're being glued, you've got to put a piece of acrylic on the table and then another piece on top and glue it. And then you've got to put another piece on the other side and glue it, right? So now you've got this U shape. Then you have to flip it over on top of another piece of acrylic and glue that. And then you've got to put another piece of acrylic on the table and take that big box and put it on top of that and glue it. And then you've got to do the top piece and you've got to put that on the table and flip. And imagine, as it gets bigger and there's more and more pieces, it becomes heavier and heavier. It gets harder for me to flip it. So that's one of the reasons I'm not doing these bigger tanks, is because there's one of me. I don't have like a second person here to grab the other side and help me flip it over. So I do it with some big sumps, and sometimes I have to ask for help. And when I was working on my big sump for my reef, I was lucky. I had a customer that swung by and says, hey, while you're here, would you mind giving me 20 minutes of your time to haul this outside so I can route off the edges and then rinse it off and carry it back in? And I mean, literally, it was like a minute to get it out there. They stand there and observe me for all that time, and then a minute to bring it back in, and they were done. And they said, sure, no problem, which was really nice, because otherwise I have to do it myself, and it involves straps and dollies, and it's a real pain. So yeah, that's why I don't really do the big stuff when it comes to that, if I can avoid it. But see, with a display tank, the acrylic has to be really thick. And I've seen tanks made of 3/8, acrylic tanks, that the walls would bulge out. So here you've got this tall tank, but the walls are doing this weird, like, pregnant belly thing. And so the thicker the acrylic, the less of that bulge you'll get. You'll still see one if you look really hard. If you look at the end of your tank and look lengthwise, you can see if the wall is bulging out, and that's a real thing. So you don't want that to happen. And because it's thicker, it's heavier. Every single piece I got to put on the table to cut out is super heavy. Just 3/8 alone, a sheet of 3/8 is 80 pounds. And I have to take it off the rack, over my head, and put it onto the table. And let's pretend it's 3/4. I'm just going to assume that's 160 pounds. And then if we went 1 inch, that might be 200 pounds per sheet. So yeah, that's why I don't do the big tanks. Have you tried Reef Enhance yet? I've got one on order arriving today, as well as the Camor. Reef Enhance I have tried. I've used it a couple of times. But I'm at the point now where I'm adding so many things to my tank, or I was, that I stopped because I was worried about chemical soup. I just felt like I'm putting too many things in the tank at once. I'm creating issues I shouldn't be contending with. The no-pox has been a really big deal. It's not been a simple, benign thing that just happens in the background like vodka dosing was. This, the slime that it creates has driven me a little bit bonkers. I've had to keep cleaning it out. I'm now at a lower dose to see if it will maintain at the number that my test kit is showing. I contacted Red Sea directly for help to see what they had to say about what I was experiencing. And the only thing that they said that was what I consider helpful is that they said, well, your slime now is no longer pink. That means you're near the end. So, instead I had like this clear slime, and I cleaned out a whole bunch of my sump with my left hand, which wasn't fun because I'm a righty. And I got as much as I could out of there, but I noticed the overflow box at the end is full of the slime. The refugium of my sump still has some slime. I got to take the protein skimmer out again and blast it with a garden hose to get all that crap out of it, and so that things will be normal again. So anyway, with no pox in there, I wasn't really comfortable putting in things like Live Rock Enhance or Reef Enhance or anything else, because I just felt like there's too many bacteria happening in the tank at once, and maybe it's causing these slime blooms, even though I'm pretty sure it's all no-pox related. Dustin says, are cheaper bone cutters just as good as the more expensive cutters? The bone cutters for cutting frags, they come in many shapes and styles. I've never, I don't think I've ever bought what I would consider an expensive pair. Usually whatever I'm finding is, either in a kit or it's like less than 20 bucks for one. And they last forever. I mean, I have a whole bin filled with stainless steel tools, and some are pretty old, but they aren't broke, and so I still use them. And I've never broken, like I said, I've never actually even physically broken one. I don't think I've even thrown one away. So they tend to last a long time. It's really good if you rinse them as soon as you're done. I've seen people that put like a magnetic strip up in their fish room and they just hang them on there. They can drip dry, but then you just look and there's like these rusty tools hanging on the wall, and I wouldn't put those in my tank. I wouldn't even want to use them. If you were using them and you somehow cut yourself, now you got to get a tetanus shot because you have rusty tools. So I do like stainless steel, and I do recommend that, but I don't know, I haven't really come across any that are considered expensive. I guess surgical tools would be more expensive. I've never gone that route. I find them at Macna and Aquashella and wherever Dirk is. Dirk sells all kinds of this stuff at the trade shows. And Dirk's Reef, he is a physical fish store that goes everywhere, and he brings 1 billion items in his booth that's like 5 booths long. And if you are looking for something obscure, he's got it. So that's super handy. H. Wolf says, I'm looking for a sump, and I would like to know how long it would take for you to build it. Typically, I try to get sumps built within 4 weeks of payment received. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but I'm not crazy backlogged. Right now, actually, I've got something like 10 orders to knock out, and I believe I can get everybody taken care of before I leave town on Wednesday. So that would be good, because I don't really want anyone to have to wait. If I can get their order to them sooner, that's always ideal. And I try to update people and let them know how, what's the progress with their order, if it's been a little bit longer than it should have been. So I try to make sure people are in the loop. Jeremy, you caught me live. Hi there. The build of a sump, the physical build, takes a few days. And that's because you have to glue things and let them cure before you can touch them again. And I've got a design on the computer, then I have to get it cut out of the machine, and then I got to prepare all the edges, and then I start peeling off the paper and I start gluing it. It goes through its whole process. It sits, for at least a day before I then route off all the edges and start cleaning it up and adding the plumbing parts and put a sticker on the front. And I like to let it sit for a couple of days before it heads out the door as well, because I don't feel comfortable putting brand newly glued acrylic in a box, especially when the temperature outside is 100 degrees, because I'm pretty sure that's what causes all those bubbles you see in a seam, because the solvent's so new and let's just call it weak because it hasn't fully cured, that you're getting some weird reactions. And I've seen a couple of things that I shipped where I kind of did in a hurry, and it came back to me and I was like, oh, look at all these bubbles. I did not put that in the box like that. So that's why I've been more adamant that I wait a little bit before I put it in a box. And I've got a couple of things I built here last week. A couple of people needed top-off containers, and they're done, and they are cured, and they can go out on Monday. So that's good. Kekoa asks, would a mild acrylic adhesive work with 3D printed parts? I don't use 3D printed parts, so I have zero experience with that. I don't know the answer. But there are others out there that use them, and they might give you some advice. Sorry. Dustin says, I have had friends that had problems with the overflow boxes malfunctioning and overflowing their sump. Is the theory the bigger the overflow box, the better? No, not at all. What it is the system wasn't set up correctly. The overflow box, its job is to do one thing: get water out of the tank and into the sump. And however you configure your plumbing will dictate how the overflow box operates. So for example, let's say you have an overflow box on this end of the tank and you've got the return on this end of the tank pushing water toward the box. There's teeth on the box, which means the water line cannot be lower than that. Now, if the box failed, if the box fell apart and let more water, like this much water out of the tank, go down because there was a bad leak in the seam, I could see that being, okay, you're right, the box made a mistake. But mostly, it's going to be the returns are too low in the tank and should have been lifted up higher so that you're breaking the siphon within ½ an inch to an inch of water. You should only be allowing 1 inch of water draining from the display tank into the sump in a properly configured setup. Yes, I did acknowledge you, Jeremy, too. We'll throw this on this. Oh, it scrolled up. Should larger tanks be built with glass or acrylic panels? Actually, the bigger tanks are made out of acrylic for weight reasons. They're just so darn heavy. And I was involved, I'm still involved in a huge project with a 2,000-gallon aquarium. And the entire thing is 16 feet long and it's made of acrylic. And that video is coming to this channel soon. And that one was made out of 2 1/4 thick acrylic. And very, very heavy. I'm trying to remember the weight. 5,000 pounds? I don't know, it was a lot. And if it had been glass, it would have been even worse. And then where are you going to get, I mean, I'm saying this without an answer. Where are you getting 16-foot long pieces of glass? Obviously they exist, but you got to get them. And again, the whole assembly process and the trust issue with silicone and all that. Typically the giant tanks are made with acrylic. And so here's the thing about acrylic versus glass. If you want a rimless tank like my anemone cube, you definitely want to have glass because rimless tanks swell outward and they bow and drives me nuts. I hate that look. I've seen cute little tanks made of acrylic that are rimless and you just see the tops bending out like 3/4 of an inch. It's a lot and it doesn't look straight anymore. And that's a problem for me because I'm worried about it blowing out at some point. It's already got a lot of stress on it. It's already stretching and it's going to tug at the 4 corners. So when it comes to rimless, I tell everyone, go with glass because glass stays rigid and straight and true and will hold up long term. But that doesn't mean you can have a 240-gallon rimless tank. Matter of fact, I just had a friend who was like, I really want rimless, and I did everything I could to convince him not to get that. And he kind of admitted the next day all the things that are not good about a rimless tank. I was like, you're starting to sound like me. And he was like, yeah, I mean, it's true. It's really annoying. And I was like, yeah, I know. So if I was replacing that tank right there, I would put it with a Euro brace on the top again. And I just prefer a nice, clean, square tank. I loved using my cleaning magnets to clean the glass. And I hate when I'm using on a rimless because it always sloshes water over the inside and down the outside. And the outside gets that salt creep and you're having to clean the glass on the outside now. And if you're using a cleaning magnet, then you know that if you get the outside wet, it takes forever to dry. And as you use it, it's like you're putting this white haze all over the outside of the tank because of the salt. And there's even a risk of scratching your tank a little bit, because of the crap that's building up on the outside magnet. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of rimless anyway. So I kind of switched gears there. Thoric asks, have you had any luck trapping the tank from the anemone cube? I haven't even done it yet. I did want to update you guys on the clownfish. So the clownfish that was down in the refugium, I moved him into the anemone cube and he went straight up to the female clown and they seemed good. And then within a few days, they weren't good. I was like, man, I was really sure this was going to work out. So she now stays at the opposite end of the tank, kind of near the surface. And I know the other fish are kind of checking her out and bugging her, because they're just bullies. But it's not a fight. It's not a squabble. And I've noticed some other clowns are kind of visiting her, especially at night around feeding time, which is interesting. So I think it's going to work out. But yeah, I got to catch the hippo. And there's a whole slew of things I need to do. One of the things that I need to do is I need to break down the frag system entirely. I'm completely taking it down to the floor. I'm going to go ahead and add a new drain to it so I can hook up the Herbie system. I'm going to remove the substrate. I'm going to push the live rock toward the back and put a tray across the front, which I hate to do, but everyone says, if you're going to have frags, you need a frag tray to put the frags in. So I'm going to make one. and I'll put it in the front. So I have my live rock behind. I'm going to catch some fish out of that tank and put them in the main reef. And I'm going to put the hippo in the frag system. So that way he or she, I guess she, can do her thing. Daniel asks, what do you keep your salt in? I keep mine in a 5-gallon bucket, and my lids go bad. I'm tired of having to buy new lids every couple of years. Well, some salts that you buy come in a bucket, and inside the bucket, the salt is even bagged within it to where you can tie off the bag and keep all the moisture out of it before you put the lid back on. A lot of salts that we buy come in a bucket, so you kind of get a free lid every single time you buy a bucket of salt. But if you're buying salt by the box or by the bag and you're having to reuse buckets, yeah, you're going to have to replace the lids from time to time or get fresh buckets with a new O-ring to keep a good seal on that salt. I have a huge barrel in my garage that makes 1,000 gallons of salt water. And that barrel is cardboard with a metal ring that latches on top. And inside is 2 bags that the salt is in. And I've had that barrel for probably 2 years now because I don't do very many water changes. And all I do is, as soon as I'm done scooping out salt, I then will grab all the bag and push down toward the salt to suck out all the air. I like twist it off and tie it, and then I close the next bag on top of it and tie it to keep any moisture out so my salt doesn't turn into hard bricks. Michael says, when you dose Prodibio, do you have to test for the elements in it? No, I don't. I've been using Prodibio since 2011, and I use it I use it 2 times a month. And it's been just a very simple additive that just kind of fills in the voids. It probably is what allowed me to go this long without water changes too. Lewis asks, is it okay to run the Refugium Light for 24 hours, 7 days a week for Chaetomorpha? There's no benefit to that, so I wouldn't do it. Chaetomorpha doesn't need 24 hours of light. It's not going to grow better and more efficiently with 24 hours of light. It's a plant. Plants have normal photosynthesis periods, and 9 hours of light is plenty for Chaetomorpha. The only reason people were doing 24 hours of light per day with certain macroalgae is because they would go sexual. Chaetomorpha does not do that, so it doesn't need it. And there's only like 2 or 3 strains of Caulerpa that do go sexual, and those are the ones that need the 24 hours of light to prevent that from happening. It doesn't make the plants grow better. It just stopped the bleeding, which is literally what the plant did. It would bleed out the green out of its stems, and your water would turn green, and the plant would turn completely clear, and then would just dissolve. Tyler, I'm reading your question. It was kind of long. I got a 4-inch frag of a montipora cap where I saw the part missing from the display tank. In my tank it is encrusting. I've had it for about 2 months. Will it plate again? Any bit of coral DNA that survives can turn into another colony again. So if you had a montipora in one spot and you broke off most of it or moved a lot of it or some of it died or RTN'd or whatever, but there's a little space that can regrow. And so I would cut out all the dead and I would just keep an eye on it and make sure nothing's stinging it or covering it with sand or anything like that, and you can have new growth. I have a little tiny speck. Let me see how it's doing. Let me check on it. I haven't looked at it in a while. Yeah, so what was it, 2 years ago? I had a coral that I called the Unknown Acro, and when I bought it, it was a frag plug about that wide with a single stick on it, and it was bone white with brown polyps. I thought, man, I have a feeling this is going to be something gorgeous. And so I stuck it in my tank, over there on that end, and it ended up growing into a beautiful snowflake, light blue. I would send picture updates to the person that sold it to me and say, look at what it looks like now. And they're like, wow, I can't believe that piece turned into that. That's amazing. And then something happened to my tank about a year ago, maybe a little bit less, and a lot of it died. It was an RTN thing, and just a whole, matter of fact, I thought it all died. And of course, at one point, I just removed the skeleton. And then about 3 months ago, I saw, or spotted, a tiny bit of life on this large piece of rock that has an egg can, and it has a a chalice, and it has this. And there was this little speck of life. I'm like, what the heck is that? And I'm staring at it. I'm like, it's not a leather. And I'm like, you know what? That's a tiny bit of the unknown Acropora. So that is now about this big. It's just a little puddle. The chalice hasn't touched it, or it's holding its own against the chalice because the chalice is encrusted on that rock. And I'm just like, wow, I'm leaving it alone, but I'd rather like pluck it out. There is something in my attic. I keep hearing weird sounds, and weird stuff's going on in my attic. I'll tell you, let me switch gears for a second. So check this out. Back over here is my kitchen and my utility room and my RODI system. And about a week ago, the air coming out of that vent in the ceiling is pouring out hot air instead of cold air, which that's not even possible. I mean, literally, I was like, what the heck? So I just closed the vent. Then today, I got up to make coffee, and this barrel that's been sitting in my way since I did the sump change, it's filled with crap that fell out of the air vent on the ceiling. So I swept up the mess. I think there's a critter of some kind in my attic. And maybe it's tearing into the insulation to get to the cold air, because I have it all. And yeah, there's something going on. I'm going to have to do an attic inspection here pretty quick and figure out who is living up there that does not belong. Okay, back on topic. While I'm just visiting with y'all, I'm going to stick this on the screen. If you're not a member of our group on Facebook, we have a great group. There's over 5,000 members, and we are there to help you with your tank, answer your questions, and provide you with useful information, share pretty pictures and videos. Well, sometimes people share nice stories too. So it's a great place to be. We are super nice. We actually have a rule that you cannot be mean. So it's, you know, the rule is be kind or be banned. So, I mean, it's pretty simple. Just be kind. And you know who judges who, if you're kind or not? Me. I judge. So if you're not being kind, you're gone. So I'm just letting you guys know, if you want to be part of a really fun group that's friendly, you're definitely invited. And we have some moderators to keep the peace, remind you guys, that we're adults, and to make sure that the conversations are going smoothly. There's no selling in the group. It's literally educational purposes. I am the only guy that does sell in the group a little tiny bit just because I have to make a living, but even I don't abuse it because I hate ads. So I just wanted to invite you guys. All right. Odile says, do you have any plans to come see the new aquarium in St. Louis? I don't have plans yet, but I do want to visit more places. And I have a coffee mug. It's too far away. But I've had this coffee mug now for a long time from the Georgia Aquarium, and I just discovered last night that the handle right here is cracked. And I'm glad I caught it, obviously, before I had it full of coffee and it just snapped off and dumped coffee all over me. That would have been awful. But it made me kind of sad because that was kind of one of my favorite coffee mugs. And so now I have to go back to the Georgia Aquarium to get myself a new mug. But okay, here's something cool that maybe some of you guys aren't aware of. There was a fish sold on Live Aquaria this week for $25,000. It's a peppermint angelfish, and they come from very deep waters. Don't quote me, but I think I read that they live at 600 feet below the surface. I mean, they are a deep, deep water fish, and they're beautiful. So, I can't afford that. It's too darn expensive, but I could afford this. So these are peppermint angelfish. This was painted by my friend Nori Vossen, and she had these for sale at Aquashella, and I bought them because this was like 45 bucks. I can afford this. So anyway, beautiful fish. $25,000, and it's sold in like 30 seconds flat. From the moment it hit their website, it was gone within a minute. And it made me sad. I was so sad that that fish had sold and that I wasn't the one that bought it. I can't possibly afford it. But I was sad because I was like, oh, that looked great in my reef. And then every week when we're on YouTube, everyone's going to want to see it and they can visit with it because, people come here to see the tank in person. And I felt like whoever got it is probably a private person, probably super wealthy, and has, these amazing fish that 50 people a year get to see, where I've got thousands of y'all that could really appreciate this fish. And so, yeah, I was like, I was a little bummed that I didn't buy it. I don't know how I could have come up with the money either, but yeah, great fish. I do believe that that fish may not have survived in my tank though. And can you imagine? Let's say you owned a $25,000 fish right now. Let's say you owned it and you loved it and you had the money and it was no problem for you. And then it died in the anemone, or you found it sucked to a powerhead. Oh my God, how would you feel then? I mean, that's a lot of money. So I believe I also read that they like colder water, you know, from being so deep in the ocean. So it probably wouldn't have done well in my reef because my tank tends to be around 80 degrees every day, and probably have to keep the tank at 75 to keep that fish happy. But anyway, gorgeous fish. I would have loved to have owned it. I don't think it'll ever happen in my lifetime, but it was a pretty cool story. Dustin says, what size tank would you need to have? Oh, okay. When do you need to reinforce the floor under a tank is the question that Dustin is asking. When you have an aquarium, there's going to be a certain amount of gallons it holds, and you can do some rough math, like 10 pounds per gallon, to get a general idea of what it's going to weigh. So 100-gallon tanks, at least 1,000 pounds total. And you know, you've got the weight of the tank, you've got the stand, you've got the sump, you've got all the water, you've got sand and rock. It could be more. It could be 1,500 pounds. So then you start thinking about it. Well, how big is the area the tank is going to sit? A 100-gallon tank is 4-5 feet long. So can 4 or 5 people stand in that spot and do this on the floor, and the floor is stable? And if the floor is shaking under those people, odds are the floor is not sturdy enough to support the aquarium. So if you have a concrete floor, it shouldn't be a problem. If you're on the second story or third story of a house, or if you're in apartments, that's where things change, and that's where the rules change, and they're like nothing over 20 gallons is allowed in your lease. So you want to find out how your house is built, you know, where you live, how is that built, and also you want to know which way the joists in the floor are going, because if you have an aquarium like this sitting on top of a joist right underneath it, and it keeps rocking on top of it, it's probably going to fall over. But if all the joists are going this direction and the tank's sitting on top, then it has nowhere to go because it's being supported in multiple spots. And if you have any doubts whatsoever and you feel like you could reinforce the floor, then you probably should reinforce the floor. And there's a friend of mine not too far away, a customer of mine, who his landlord said, you need to reinforce that floor under that aquarium. And he, you know, the landlord said it was gonna be like $1,000 or $1,500 for them to do it. And I felt like he could probably do it for $100 himself with a 4x4 post and some concrete blocks and some oak shims. And it's just a dirty, nasty job crawling under the house and putting this cross beam under all the joists and then putting 2 piers underneath and then shimming it up with a hammer until they're nice and snug. And then you could stand in front of the tank and you could bounce and nothing moves. And you've done a good job. But if there's any kind of bounce, if there's any kind of give, that's a factor. And then also keep in mind too, some of our nicer, more modern homes have hardwood floors that are really a floating floor, which means there's air underneath. And when you put a tank on top, you're kind of pushing down on the float, and you might get some really weird ripple effects in your floor from that room. So you might have to opt into cutting out the spot where the stand will sit, nestled down into the floating floor. Possibly, I don't know. That's just something that I'd probably consider myself, because that tank's going to be there for a long time. Might as well put it flat on the concrete where I know it's evenly supported. Corey, he said that you've talked about vodka several times. Actually, I have. And I do have an article about vodka dosing. Let me just do that real quick. Vodka dosing. Milev. I typed that into Google. Boom, we have an answer. And this is the article. Copy. Paste. So there's the article for you guys to where you could read more about it. And inside that article is a much longer, more in-depth article that really goes into how vodka dosing got started. And it is a cheap way of lowering nitrates in a tank. It does not affect phosphates. It only works on nitrates. And I did it for a few years. And I have just chosen different things because I wanted to see what biopellets were like. I wanted to see what the bricks were like. I wanted to see what Nopox is like. And, you know, so that's why I'm not just like, well, because they're, I mean, my friend Dwayne, for example, used the same brand of salt for like 16 years. And there's been so many brands of salt on the market. And yet he has chosen to only use like whatever it was, Instant Ocean. He says, it's fine, it works great. And so he would not change. He actually only recently changed because for some reason he couldn't get that salt in his area anymore. So he finally broke down and switched flavors. And so that kind of a thought process for people that have been in the hobby a long time, we do kind of get entrenched in our ways and we're like, vodka dosing, that's what I use. I'm sticking with that for the rest of my life. And they do. But I kind of like to change things up. Number one, I like to see if it'll work differently, you know, or how things work. Plus, when you guys come to say, hey, you know, have you tried this? I can actually say, yes, I have, and it worked, or no, or no, it didn't work. You know, I tried, and I can go into detail of what I did, and then you can decide for yourself if it's worth going that direction or not. Glenn Smith says, is there another kit for testing strontium besides Salifert? Oh, I'm sure there is. I bet Elos has one. I feel like they do. Probably Nios does. I would just Google it, and I'm sure there's going to be more kits on the market. And who knows, there might even be a strontium test for the ReefBot, because the ReefBot is this thing that looks like a computer case with a bunch of vials, and you can choose which tests you want to perform with that unit. And you could have, I mean, it's an expensive thing, but you could say, that's my strontium tester. Jamie asks, what do you consider as the most essential item, or the most essential items, for a 125-gallon tank? To run a reef? Well, it's all the basics. So you're going to need an aquarium, you're going to need a stand, you're going to need an RODI system, you're going to need heaters, test kits, thermometer, salt, sand, rock. Those are all my essentials. Of course, you're going to need in-tank flow, you're going to need lighting, you're going to need a protein skimmer. These are probably inside some of my articles too that are on my website about how to set up a saltwater tank. And I kind of go through the bullet list. Matter of fact, that's another good one I can give you guys really quick. What do I call that? I think it's called Newbie. See if I'm right. I was wrong. Okay. Set up saltwater tank. All right. This is a very, very long article for you guys. And it has a lot of sublinks in it that take you to other articles or other videos. And it probably could use an update, actually. But for the general basics, you want to start with that article right there. I'm giving serious thought to getting a Neptune Apex for my aquarium. They're kind of difficult to get in Ireland, so I need some advice. Do you recommend the full version or the EL model? I think since it's already a trouble to get it, I would get the full model. And since it's Ireland, I'm assuming you have to use the EB6 for a different shaped power plug. I know Europe has one. I don't know if Ireland matches Europe. Haven't been to Ireland. And so you'll probably want a couple of energy bars to go with your brain. And the full system, well, see, that's the question. Because the full system may not even be available. I don't know if they make an 832 that works with the power you need to pull. You know, if it has the right shape for the outlets. That's a problem. I don't know the answer to that. Sorry. So I'm going to say I do not know. Kelly asks, do you build custom overflow boxes? Yes, I do. I build all different shapes and sizes. I shipped out several this week. And I just need from you the specific dimensions. I need to know the width, you know, the length of it, the width or the depth of it, and then the exact height that fits your aquarium. You know, if the hole's in the back, are you wanting a box that floats at the top of the tank? I actually have a bunch of pictures of overflow boxes I made recently that I can show you guys. Let's see. Debating how to do this. All right, this will probably be simple. So then here is one overflow box that I built. And there's another short one, that's a shallow one. There's a taller one. And then that is a video. This one here, I pulled off the paper. You can see it's black. I make them with lids, and the lids keep the light out of them so that you don't have algae growing in them. And this is the floating one I was talking about that would cover that 1.5-inch hole in the back of your tank. So you can just tell me what you need, and then I can tell you if I can make it. Some people ask me, can you make the ghost overflow or the shadow overflow? No, I do not. Those are patented. They belong to a different company. You can contact them and say, I want that, and they will be happy to sell you one. But if you're saying, you know, I'm drilling my tank myself, I need a box to go inside my tank, I want it to look like this, we can definitely discuss. And I have a bunch of examples on my website showing exactly the kind that I build. And that way you can, you can see if it's something that you like and if you'd like to get one from me. Tyler's asking, is it too early for a strong drink, Mark? Actually, it's not too early, but I'm going to hold off. I got someone come over here in less than an hour, and we're supposed to film an interview together. So I don't want to be hammered for that. And I kind of have an idea of what I want to do during that interview, so I think that that would be smart to not be full of alcohol right now. Devin says, I have a friend who's battling dinoflagellates, and someone told her to dose bleach, and I told her it was a bad idea. I think it's a crazy idea. I know there's a thread about it on Reef to Reef, where people are putting in like a teaspoon of bleach in their aquarium, and I'm just blown away. I mean, there are some really weird things that people have been doing in recent years. Eating Tide Pods, spitting in ice cream, licking taco shells, and putting bleach in your aquarium. I think it's nuts. I'm probably wrong, but I think it's nuts. I know I am not inclined to go that direction. Dinoflagellates suck. They're difficult to overcome, but bleach in an aquarium sounds like a really bad plan. So I am not going to I'm not going to support that camp. I would suggest Live Rock Enhance. I had a theory that would help with dinoflagellates, and I had a couple of people buy it from my website to try with their tanks, and over a period of about 4 weeks, it went away. I guess I want to talk about Live Rock Enhance for a few minutes, because I want to kind of clarify some points. I don't know. I mean, it's really strange to me. I guess because I live and breathe the saltwater hobby, I tend to be in tune with a lot of the topics. And so when I read posts from people that ask what I think are glaringly obvious questions, I'm just kind of surprised. How did you not know such and such does this? Or how did you not know you could do that? But like I said, maybe they're not living and breathing it like I do. So with Live Rock Enhance, it's not a miracle cure that will fix your tank in a matter of 3 or 4 days or 5 days or 6 days. Live Rock Enhance is a bacteria, an enzyme, and catalyst or something like that. There's ingredients in there that will help clean your tank of detritus. You're actually adding in a certain bacteria that will eat and consume waste. And it will devour all the crap on your live rock so that your rock becomes more porous again and can continue to do its natural filtration, which is denitrification. So in that regard, great product. But when it came out, I was like, I wonder if this would compete with cyanobacteria. I wonder if this would outcompete dinoflagellates. So I had this crazy thought, and my frag system had some cyano going on. It wasn't bad. There was like this pink on the walls. It wasn't the big red blanket. I had one little patch at one end of the tank with a little bit of red, and I said, I'm going to put in the Live Rock Enhance. And all I did was, I thought I had the scoop here on my table, but I guess I don't. It must be in the fish room. I opened the jar. I took the scoop, I got one scoop, and I put it in the tank, and then I took a second scoop, and I put it in the tank, and I walked away. That was it. I didn't turn anything off. I didn't turn anything on. I didn't pre-mix. I didn't soak. I just let it go across the surface of the water. Some of it rained down in the reef, and some of it went down the drain and through all the filtration. And my tank got a little cloudy for a couple hours, and then it got crystal clear again a few hours later. And I did that 4 times in 2 weeks. So I dosed it every 3 days, basically. And after the 2 weeks were done, I'm looking at the tank, and let's say longer. I'd say 4 weeks after I'd done this, I was looking at the tank, and the tank was vastly cleaner. I mean, it was just like night and day. And I was really upset with myself for not taking the before picture, because the after was incredible. And all it was 4 simple doses. The only thing I know you need to turn off when we're using Live Rock Enhance is the UV, because UV kills bacteria, and you want this bacteria to live. That's why you put it in the tank. So you can keep the skimmer running, you can do your water changes, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to change anything except put it in the tank. That's as hard as it is. And you don't have to even pre-mix it in water and then pour it in. If some goes down the drain, that's fine. It's still part of the entire system. And that is exactly what Tulio told me. He says, just put it in the tank. You don't have to do anything. I was like, oh, okay. So I read comments from people, and they're like, well, I turned off my skimmer for 3 hours, and I pre-mixed it for 30 minutes, and I did this. I'm like, wow, everyone's going to a lot of trouble. It's really easy to use. So, and I know some of it's because they read the instructions, where Tulio told me just put it in your tank. We were on the phone, and he was berating me. He's like, Mark, put it in the tank right now. Just do it this second. And I've got the phone in my ear, and I'm opening the jar. I'm like, okay, well, let me turn off the return pump. He goes, no, let it all just go wherever it goes. Doesn't matter. I was like, all right. So anyway, Live Rock Enhance works over a period of weeks, not days. And so if you're expecting some kind of miracle in 10 days, you're not going to see it. But if you were using it every couple of days or every 3 days for about 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you're going to see a huge change in the way your tank looks. And I think you'll be really happy. The coralline just took off. It just looked so vivid. Matter of fact, it became so thick it was falling off the walls of the sump. So that was pretty neat. Coral Reef Keeper says, on your new sump, I noticed the drain goes through a bulkhead at the bottom versus going into the water from the top. What are the benefits of this setup? In that video, I explained how by bringing the water in under the surface of the water with that gate valve, that all that comes out is pure water and no air bubbles. And you just get that flow of water flowing into the sump with no sound. So you got no salt creep, no spatter, no bubbly mess. It's incredible. And I am super duper spoiled with the quietness of my sump. I'm here talking to you with a microphone, but there's almost no sound behind me. I can hear a little bit of trickle from the Refugium, and I can hear my little cooling fans are blowing right now because it's kind of warm in here. But other than that, it's an awesome change from my old system of having drains come down in the top of the sump and go into a bubble tower, and it's just kind of boiling away in there. And then, of course, mostly bubble-free water pours out the bottom, which is exactly what it's intended to do. But I was very, very impressed with the silence of the Herbie system. And so I was Herbieing into the top of the sump, but I really didn't want that on my new sump. I wanted to come in the side of the sump. And so I put the inlets going in low instead of near the surface. And so it pushes water into the Refugium perfectly. It pushes water in the skimmer section. I mentioned this last week, and it's still true. I can use my emergency drains for the sock box module. And I've got it where I can dial the knobs on those gate valves just right to where I can get water to go down the emergency drains but not hear it, which is incredible. Sly Fox says, what are your thoughts on algae scrubbers? It's not new technology, but apparently a patent was finally expired or released, which allowed more companies to make them. And there's quite a few on the market. I haven't used one myself. I've seen them in operation here, there, and everywhere, and they seem to be becoming more and more popular. So I would say that that you probably couldn't go wrong. I've been hearing some interesting reports about how a really good turf scrubber will reduce nitrate. And that caught my attention. So I haven't done anything. I've got a friend, his name is Jason Langer, and he makes these amazing ones that are expensive, but you can pull the tray out. It's a drawer that comes out. See my burned finger? Still healing. You can pull the tray out while it's still running, and it's just water's pouring in because it's sort of, I kind of compare it to a file cabinet, and so the water's going in and there's lights in there, and it's doing the water, but you can pull the middle out and just keep it running. You don't have to shut it off. You don't have to disconnect anything, and you can go deal with clean up the screen and put it back and just shove the drawer back in. It's like, that is really cool. So, but like I said, that one's expensive. It's on BRS, and I think they're like $1,000. You know, they're not going to be inexpensive. But the thing about turf scrubbers is that they have to be above the water line of your sump. You can't put them down deep. You definitely can't put them in the sump because of the lights on the side, because they'll short out, right? So it's got to be high enough up. So you need it to sit somewhere, like on top of your sump, for example, and you got to use a pump to push water into it, and then it has to drain back down into the sump. And to remove the tray off the top, you might have to turn off the pump, disconnect a union, pull the unit out to lift the tray out, because there's not a lot of vertical space above a sump under most stands. So that's why I like Jason's, because you can just set it on the edge of the sump and pull the drawer out. There's no lifting. I was like, wow, that's a really great concept. And I saw it in action when I was visiting Minnesota, and it was really neat. I took some pictures. I haven't shared those yet. Will says, I'm really wanting to change the right side of my aquascape in my 280-gallon reef. Would it cause issues if I removed all the live rock on the right side overnight so I could redo the cement and rods? Well, yeah. I mean, your tank will definitely take a hit because you're making a big change. You're removing a lot of rock, but can your tank survive it? Probably. The thing is, the rock might be several years old, and you can answer that. And let's say it's old and it's full of detritus, so you take the rock out and you're rinsing it off in a barrel of salt water. You're kind of cleaning it to put it back in the tank. But then you're talking about using cement and rods and putty and stuff like that to hold it all together to create some kind of an aquascape that you will then put back in the tank. And that rock and the chemicals from the concrete bonding agent could affect your livestock. So it comes down to what you're using and how much of it you're using. How is this a lot or is it just a little bit? Because if you are doing something really major, you might want to cure that in some salt water for a week or two and then test it, make sure alkalinity and calcium and salinity and all that looks right. And then you're like, okay, I can trust this water. That means I can trust this rock. You can put that rock back in your tank now. So yeah, it's possible to do it. The other choice would be to do man-made rock and build this thing, and again, cure it for a while in some salt water and make sure everything's good before you add it to your system. And that way, when you pull the rock out and you put the new thing in, you can kind of speed things along a little bit more because you kind of did the prep work in advance. Best doser for the nano tank. There's so many on the market, but I'm going to push the Camor because I sell it. The Camor X1 doser is about that big and about that tall. It's just a little tiny, sort of like an oval, and it's about that wide. And it's $60. One power supply can run up to 4 of those dosers, so you can actually have multiples. And they're only $60 each, and you control them from your phone because it's Bluetooth. It's amazing. I mean, the price is fantastic. For a long time, I was really in love with the ice cap doser, and I know most people didn't use it, but I thought it was a great little doser. And those were $80 and $90 a piece. The 90 for the master, and then 80 for all the slave units. And so you were looking at, $270 or so to get 3 things dosed. Well, with the Camor, you can do 3 things for 180. I mean, it's saving like $100 right there. And I didn't have the ability to use my phone. I had to just push the buttons on the top and set things that way. So I really like it, and I've got about a dozen in stock if you're interested in getting that. So Camor X1, it's a Bluetooth doser. Jeremy says, I've been using biopellets since day 1 and fish after 6 weeks. And my levels for phosphate are undetectable and nitrates are super low, and I'm a heavy feeder. Now I'm scared of dinoflagellates. Should I change anything? No, I don't think you need to change anything. I think that your tank is probably doing just fine. Dinoflagellates come from tanks that have no nitrate, no phosphate, and you're getting a little bit of a measurement on each of those. And if you don't have quite enough, you can feed a little bit more heavily. There's nothing wrong with feeding your fish. And that way you'll end up with nitrate and phosphate just because every time a fish poos or pees, it's adding to the water. And if you resist the urge to do a water change, it gets a chance to ferment and get those numbers up a little bit. But dinos don't just happen to everybody. If it happened to everybody, we'd all just say, yeah, you'll just have to live through it. But it happens to some people. The thing is, if you start to see dinoflagellates in your tank, you want to remove them as soon as you can. And that can be as simple as scraping it together and then siphoning out the bulk of it. If it's on a rock or it's on a coral, take that thing out, put it in a bucket of salt water and swoosh it around so it's free of that crap, and put it back in your tank. And that way you don't let it just keep spreading and growing and becoming a bigger problem. A. Nils says, I just bought a used reef and there are discosoma, I never say that word out loud, just about everywhere. He's talking about mushrooms. Yeah, I have a rule, never put a mushroom in my reef tank. I mean, I will get the occasional Ricordia because I don't consider them mushrooms, even though technically they're in that family. But mushrooms are the worst at taking up real estate, and they go everywhere. They not only will spread through petal laceration and become more and more on the rockwork, they will also spin themselves like a top and pop off and land somewhere else and reattach. It's a real deal. So if you are trying to remove mushrooms from your tank, you're going to have to take the rock, set it up on a work tray, and just scrape off every mushroom you can. Wear eye protection, wear gloves, keep your mouth shut, scrape them off, and then put them back in the tank. If you have some blue light handy, you can hold the rock under the blue light, and usually that'll help you pop, it'll make them pop into your vision because they get really small. They'll shrink down really small, especially when you start manhandling the rock. But if you can remove them by scraping, that's usually your best bet because that way it's 100% gone. If you try things like boiling water, injecting with kalkwasser, hitting them with a laser, they never really die. They just kind of weaken or they spread. So it's just the simplest solution is to deal with it one rock at a time until it's completely gone. And when I set up my 280 gallon reef, I used all the rock on my 29 gallon and my 55 gallon aquarium. I had a guy sitting on the floor, Indian style, on a big blue tarp, and his job was to rip off every mushroom off every rock before that rock went in the new tank. And he sat there for hours ripping off mushrooms, thousands of mushrooms. And he got rid of a whole bunch. And a week later, I'm looking in the tank at my new aquascape. I'm like, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. And so I had to go in there, I had to scrape those off too while they were tiny before they could become a problem. Gerald says, how is the new sump keeping up? Perfectly. I'm loving my new sump. I'm so glad that I built it. And every time I look at it, it makes me happy. I don't know, does that happen to you guys or is that just me? Tristan says, how do you deal with coral aggression or chemical warfare? If it's a territory thing, you separate the corals. If it's just a chemical in the system that seems to be making a lot of pieces of livestock unhealthy or miserable, then you can run fresh carbon. And that means actually putting carbon inside a reactor, inside your sump or hanging on the back of your tank, and water's going in and coming through the carbon and going back out. And by putting in a half a cup of carbon per 50 gallons in a reactor and letting it run for a few days, it'll remove those chemicals. Carbon does not last months. It doesn't even last a month. It's good for a few days. Everyone that just hooks it up and leaves it running, don't do that. It's only good for a few days. When it's done, remove it, clean everything up. If you want to run some more carbon, you can. I have a video about using carbon properly in a reef tank. Feel free to check that out. It's a good video. Reef and Dive says, I have an elegance coral that was nearly dead on my display tank, and I moved it to the Pico where I don't even do tests and it recovered and is thriving. So the question was light and flow. You know what? Congratulations on saving that coral. There's a chance that maybe something in your reef was nipping at that coral, and that's why it was so miserable. Just a chance. It could be. Sometimes we don't blame our fish enough for what's going on to our corals, but fish are not innocent. They do things, and they have all day long to do it. So the fact that it moved into a different tank and is doing better is great. I would almost encourage you to leave it there and let it thrive and enjoy that in that system. maybe make a few small changes and let that be the showpiece of that tank. I've personally not owned an Elegance. I was on the fence about getting one that I was going to put in that corner over there. But then all my friends were like, why would you do that? So I haven't shown you guys this in a while. Let me show you another view of the tank. More of the lights are coming on. So the foreground of that video you're looking at now is in blue light, even though the webcam's not really picking it up. But the lights behind it, the middle where the blue acro is, and then the furthest end that's way in the background, that's all white light right now. So you're kind of getting a mixture of two different colors as you're looking at the tank. I'm using a couple of the RFG flow accelerators from VCA out of Phoenix. VCA is Vivid. Oh, can't think of the name. What a horrible way to promote somebody. Anyway, VCA is the company, and they 3D print those flow accelerators, and they're really nice. And I've got those on my system now, and they've been doing a good job for some time. Mike Howard says, does the X1 pump work with the calcium reactor? I would say no. For that one, you're going to want the Comore EXT. I'm trying to think if there's a number on that name too, but that's the one that's continuous duty for a calcium reactor, and that's what I use on mine. It's in my videos. So if you just look at the sump video from last week, you can see that little dosing pump and how it works. But it's the one that can handle it. And that one, you can have it run up to 120 milliliters per minute. Luke says, I'm looking to set up a 45-gallon tank. What fish and corals would you recommend? Luke, I don't know your hobby experience to answer that question properly. I would, if you're brand new or you're very new to the hobby, you might like some of the simpler corals. It also comes down to what kind of filtration you're going to run, what kind of lighting you're going to run. Are you wanting to do things that are primarily soft corals like zoanthids and leathers and mushrooms and zinnia and things like that? Or are you looking at chalices and acans, do you have an interest in SPS corals like montipora and Acropora? So all these things can be done. I've got an incredible video coming up for you guys very soon about a lovely, gorgeous reef tank that is 12 gallons. You guys are going to love it. Cliff asks, how's the new refugium going? How far has the algae grown? I would say that it is about 75% full. Let me switch cameras for you for a second here and I'll show you. Show you some proof. I believe that is pointing the right direction. See what it looks like. Yeah. So there is the refugium. So it's about 75% full now. And the part on the far left is where the flow is pushing in. That's why you see the plants are moving a little bit. So it's shoving it over some. But it's working out great. And then right here are my cooling fans. They're all on right now. And I can barely hear them. It's just enough. If you own a convection oven in your kitchen, that's an oven that has a fan that blows. It kind of has that sound when the fans are on. It's so low, it's almost invisible to me, but I do hear it slightly. And then this light is being replaced as soon as I come back from Comic-Con. I ordered the new one. It's already on its way. I'm very excited. It's made by Reef Bright. And it's an XHO that's 40 inches long instead of this one that's 48, because I don't need any light on this end. I want it to stop right here and keep the light inside the plant area and not the rest of the sump. That is one beautiful sump. Do you know how to get a mandarin to eat frozen or dry food? Tristan asks. Well, it's not something you can absolutely make happen, but you might get lucky. So what you want to do is you want to definitely have an established tank that's been going for a good duration, at least 9 months. I would prefer especially, and then a tank with live rock. If you're using dry rock, man-made rock, base rock, I'd probably want to wait even longer, like a year and a half. Really let the rock get established. And you can buy pods from Algae Barn and load up the tank with a bunch of these little bugs And then when you get your mandarin fish, you can put it inside that tank and it will start to eat the pods. But every day you're going to feed your aquarium different foods, including dry good, flake food, pellet food, and then frozen food. And as you use those, carefully observe the mandarin and see if it shows any interest in anything. And if you see it eat something other than pods, that is a huge perk, because now you can kind of guarantee they'll get a meal. There's been a lot of tricks over the years of getting mandarins to eat. My method was the mandarin diner, which is an olive jar that had a handle, and I put some pellet food in there and I would lower it down into the tank and the mandarin would swim in to get the food. The only reason that idea even occurred to me is because I was throwing in pellet food, Formula 1 and Formula 2. So the red is omnivore and the green is Formula 2 was herbivore. And the pellets would hit the sand and I watched my mandarin go, and I was like, you're kidding me. It eats pellet food? This is amazing. And I was like, okay, cool. So I didn't have to worry about the mandarin not getting enough to eat. And it was a very fat mandarin. But when I moved it into my big 280-gallon tank, there was a lot more fish and a lot more competition, and the mandarin wasn't getting enough food. And that's when it occurred to me, I need to create a way for this fish to get a meal without competition. And so I came up with the mandarin diner, and that video is on this channel as well. So the mandarin diner is this jar. I put some food in there and I lower it into the tank, and I put it the end of the jar flush with the sand bed. So that way the mandarin can just glide straight in and get some food. And then it can back its way back out. And that worked out really well for me. But I had to remove the jar so that way the food wouldn't just sit there rotting if it didn't eat it all, because it's not going to eat all the food. And I wanted to remove it. Everyone is calling me today. Oh well. The other method that I've seen was kind of a screen method. It's a gizmo you put inside your tank, and you could squirt food with a syringe into it, and then the mandarin would pluck it through the screen, through the mesh. And that was another method that came out a couple of years ago. I don't know how popular that one is. Another trick was to use, in the old days you could buy a basket of strawberries. It was an actual basket. It was green plastic. And you could fill it with live rock rubble and put that in the back corner of your tank and make a pod pile. And so this thing would sit there full of bugs, and they were safe from fish, and the mandarin would just hang out near the cage. And as the one got near the edge, it was snarfed up. So you can do that. All right, guys, we've been going for about an hour and a half, and we are out of questions. I'm pretty much out of time. I do want to remind you of a couple more things here. Today is Water Test Saturday, so we definitely want to test our water. If you are not testing your water, use your test kits and test your water. Reef Trace is coming out with a new update on Monday. And so if you don't own that app yet, you can find it for Android and for iOS. The Reef Trace app lets you log your data, and it lets you do a lot more than just that. But that was the whole premise of the app when it got started. And they just changed how you do the actual welcome screen. Before you had a certain look, and now that look's changed. There's an easier way to add items. And so all that's coming out next week. I saw some hints of it already. I got to play with it in beta test. So that's cool. And that way you can enter you want to know what your parameters are on your tank right now so you can make any changes that need to be made before things get worse. Because that's the worst thing you can do is say, my tank looks fine, everything's fine, and you don't test. And then when you see things are wrong, you're like, okay, let me get out the test kits. And so you grab your test kits and you blow the dust off of them, and you start testing. You're like, oh my God, this is bad. Oh my God, this is bad. Oh my God. And then you start thinking, oh, so much work to fix everything. What am I going to do? So if you are not being regular in your testing, you're making your life much harder. So take the 20 minutes it takes to test everything, jot down all your numbers, stick them in an app, stick them on your computer, stick them on your phone, whatever you want to do. So you've got some kind of records so you can see, you can track the trends of your water parameters, and you can also correlate how corals are doing in relation to your numbers. If you never test your water, if you're bad about that, your corals are just kind of like lucky. And that really shouldn't be how we run a reef tank. We want to take good care of our animals so they thrive, not just survive. Guys, I hope you have a great weekend. I will be gone next weekend because I'll still be in San Diego. So no live stream that day. I will still be online. You can still find me on Facebook. So that's a convenient one. You can follow me on facebook.com/MilosReef. That's where I tend to share my newsy things, and who knows, I might drop in some aquatic art from Comic-Con on that page, as well as my Instagram. So you're definitely invited to keep up in those regards. And other than that, I hope you have a great weekend. Bye.